From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. Just a few hours ago, the Alabama legislature concluded a special session called to redraw the state's 7 congressional districts. As we've reported, this session was necessary because the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with a lower court's ruling that Alabama's congressional districts, passed in 2021, were likely in violation of the Voting Rights Act. Here's the map of those current districts. This probably looks familiar because these districts have remained largely intact for the past 20 years. Specifically, the court found that black voters were packed into the 7th congressional district, diluting their voting power in the other districts. Chief Justice John Roberts, in his opinion, wrote that the legislature should redraw the map to include an additional majority black district, or, quote, something close to it. There were several maps proposed and debated this week, from their introduction to committee and to the House and Senate floors. By Wednesday, the House and Senate had each passed different map proposals, meaning that lawmakers needed to meet in conference committee to work out the differences and agree on a final plan. What emerged was a map that Republicans supported and Democrats vehemently opposed.
Lawrence County was taken out of the 4th district and put into the 5th district. Coosa County was taken out of the 3rd district and put back into the 6th district. Down in the 2nd district, it added Lowndes County and Butler County and a split deviation split up in Elmore County. And down in the 1st district, some change on Covington County. Those are the primary differences of the two maps. It improved Etowah County went out of, that was split into 3 and 4, went into 3 as a whole.
It is the definition of non-compliant. Like if you Googled non-compliant, that map would pop up. The numbers that underlie it, that we just got a few minutes ago, also demonstrate just a complete disregard for the Supreme Court order. Also, as you can see, there were some arguments made in the Supreme Court about communities of interest, black belt being one of them. This cracks the black belt and actually adopts an argument that was rejected by the Supreme Court. So looking at this process, because this is the 3rd map, all of which have gone through the process, have somehow avoided public scrutiny, avoided public hearings, and Thursday or Friday, on the deadline, we passed a brand new map that was introduced this morning.
All week, the debate and the votes have been along party lines. Democrats proposed multiple maps of their own that they felt better met the court's ruling in terms of black population in districts, only to have those plans be rejected by the Republican majority. Republicans argued that their map fixes the issue of packing, keeps communities of interest together, and creates 2 districts in which black voters have an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice.
While the plan's not based on race, the result is fairly applied with the neutral principles. That is, the BVAP in District 2 has gone from a 30.1% BVAP and under the 2021 plan to 38.3% under this 2023 plan.
So I think that your District 2 is now in violation of the Voters' Rights Act, because in violation against the court's order by giving the opportunity for blacks to be able to win. We can't show performance duty, and I'm just showing you 2017 is the closest that a Democrat has ever come, and that was in a highly polarized vote, because there were a lot of white voters who didn't want Roy Moore, who switched over and voted for Doug Jones because they felt Doug Jones, gonna get him in now, we'll get him out 6 years later, we'll get him out 2 years later. And that's what they did.
The question is, what is opportunity there? I think everybody has a different interpretation of what opportunity is. Some of the plaintiffs' plans, we're talking 40-45%. So, it's 38 there. That's where we could settle. Because
it's looking like it's ultimately going to be the special master that will draw the map. because I don't feel like we're going to ultimately end up doing what the Supreme Court told us to do.
We try to put something together we can win. We do it based on the community of interest and the compactness and having a reasonable or an opportunity there to win.
In the end, the plan dubbed Livingston 3 was passed by the House and the Senate in votes that went along party lines.
24 ayes, 6 nays. The Senate concurs on Senate Bill 5. Thanks, Senator Livingston.
Mr. President,
Senator Livingston.
Brief point of personal privilege, if I may. I want to thank
Recognized.
everybody today for their help, the committee members, the members and president here, especially the folks downstairs and reapportionment in the office. We're a little shorthanded through some sickness and things, and they've done a fantastic job of getting everything we needed, so with the exception of the functionality reports. But I do appreciate everybody's patience there. Thank you very much.
Here's a better look at the final map compared to the current map. The 1st District picks up Covington County and loses Washington and Monroe counties. The 2nd District picks up all of Montgomery, plus Lowndes, Macon, and Russell counties, and then loses Autauga and part of Elmore. The 3rd District picks up Etowah County. The 4th District loses Lawrence County and picks up Blount County, plus greater shares of Lauderdale and Tuscaloosa. The 5th District picks up Lawrence County and loses a portion of Lauderdale. The 6th District loses Blount County and picks up Autauga, Coosa, and part of Elmore. And the 7th District loses Lowndes County, parts of Tuscaloosa, and picks up Conecuh, Monroe, and Washington counties. The buzz phrase this special session has been BVAP. That stands for Black Voting Age Population. Most proposed maps sought to increase the black voting age population of the 2nd Congressional District, which is currently at about 30%. Under the plan passed by the legislature, District 2 will have 39.93 black voting age population, so almost 40%. District 7 would have 50.65% BVAP. That's down from about 54%. Of course, it's those numbers that convince Democrats that the new map does not meet the mandate from the Supreme Court. A 3-judge panel will take up the matter in federal court on August 14th. The issue of redistricting is always politically fraught, with passionate opinions on both sides. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott has some of the highlights from a long week in the State House.
The special session on redrawing Alabama's districts didn't start with floor action, but a committee meeting, and sparks flew early.
This process feels like these maps were kind of being forced on us. Also, to point out that we didn't get these until Friday. The process itself just doesn't seem like it's working very well.
We concentrated on maps put in by members and the plaintiffs. You know, if you wanted to put a map in, you could very well have put a map in.
This meeting left some with concerns.
It really is not an open process. It's not transparent. It's a process that's based on party preference, and it has nothing to do with the merits other than trying to do the bare minimum to try to get past the court ruling.
Tuesday features more committee action with new maps before lawmakers and new disagreements.
The community of interest map has a 51.55% BVAP. Other maps that are being presented to the members of this body, the opportunity map you will see has a 38.31% BVAP in the 2nd District.
They're drawing lines around performance as opposed to race. Race is what is being discussed right now. And so let's not conflate the two, and let's not allow anybody to get confused. Now, when it comes to percentages, you know, when based upon what the courts are saying, how can the African-American community elect their person of choice if they're not the majority in that district?
The choices for maps shrinks, and concerns about political fairness increase.
Once again, the state, the supermajority decided that the voting rights of black people are nothing that this state is bound to respect.
The House majority selects and passes a map supported by Republicans.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senate Bill 5 was substituted yesterday in the State Government Committee, and it is now the Community of Interest Plan. is the same billion that we passed out of this body on Wednesday.
It's a map Democrats say disobeys orders from the Supreme Court and will likely cause someone else to redraw state district lines.
We are going to be very blind to the reality of the federal courts asking us to do the right thing.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
From the very first public hearing on redistricting, lawmakers, activists, and ordinary citizens have analyzed the voting patterns of black Alabamians, and that's really at the core of this issue. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith has that story.
The Supreme Court found that voting in Alabama is highly racially polarized, which my colleague just mentioned. Black voters in Alabama vote in a politically cohesive manner. Black voters vote for black preferred candidates at a 92.3% rate. Per the U.S. Supreme Court, these are not my numbers. White voters only vote for black preferred candidates at a rate of 15.4%, again, per the Supreme Court.
In a recent Capitol Journal episode, this topic was further explored.
You know, whites tend to vote for white candidates, black tend to vote for black candidates. Now, when you look at the voting pattern, you must take into consideration race when you're drawing up districts.
And that's why Democrats advocate for more than 50% black voting age population in a district.
When you start to look at what it has taken blacks to win, most of our districts has been 55, 65% just to be able to win in the past.
But a district of less than 50% black voting age population
could definitely be drawn for a black Republican. You know, and I guess it would still be true that a black won.
And black Republicans are gaining ground. 2 years ago, State Representative Kenneth Pascal became the first black Republican elected to the Alabama legislature in 140 years.
The people in Shelby County, my district, they did not vote for me because of the color of my skin. They voted for me because they saw a God-fearing man, a veteran who served his country, loved the country, who got out and got engaged with the people in the community.
And the first black Newton City Council member won as a Republican.
I was elected for my beliefs and what I wanted to do for the people, not because of my color. I'm a patriot. I'm a Republican. I love this state. I love my party.
Alabama's Republican Party says.
So there are definitely issues out there, and there are values out there that the people of Alabama, whether Republican or Democrat, are going to agree with the Republican Party. And we're gonna talk about those. We're gonna defend our values. We're gonna talk about protecting people's rights and freedoms. And we plan to be competitive, and we're gonna do our best to win all 7 congressional districts.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the online video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next is Alabama Governor Kay Ivey. Governor, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Todd. It's always good to be with you and your viewers.
Well, you know, we haven't caught up since the regular session ended, and I was curious just your thoughts. What happened? It was a pretty big regular session. What were your general takeaways from the final result?
I certainly commend the Alabama legislature, Todd, for a job well done. There's a strong working relationship between the leadership in the legislature and the governor. And because of that, we can be more productive. So I was real proud of the work that they got done. We had the regular business of the legislature allocating the ARPA funds. And then we addressed some heavy lifts like the game plan, economic development incentives bill package.
Sure.
And then we got some important bills across the finish line like Representative Simpson's fentanyl bill. So it was a good session and very productive, and I'm proud of the Alabama legislature and proud to work with them.
Mm-hmm. I know that there were some differences between what you proposed and what the legislature did. One was on the tax rebates, the money. You know, we had all this surplus money. And so you proposed at the very beginning giving some of that back in the form of tax rebates to individual taxpayers. The final rebate ended up being about $150 per taxpayer. You originally proposed $400 for individuals and $800 for couples. Were you disappointed that the legislature didn't go quite to that high amount that you wanted?
My goal with the rebates at the outset was to provide some real relief for our people. And I thought that a large rebate for individual tax filer would help do that. But it is what it is, and the families will now have $300, and they'll get that in time to spend for Christmas. And we've already instructed the Department of Revenue to get those checks prepared according to law in a timely fashion so that those checks can go out in time for Christmas.
Mm-hmm. I know there was this issue of the fentanyl sentencing bill. There was the wrong version got transmitted to your office, so basically what got signed into law has to be redone somehow. Everybody was pretty much supportive of this, to my recollection. So my question is, why not include that in the special session call that, they were in special session this week? Why not include that to kind of get that cleared up before, right now instead of waiting until next year?
Because, Todd, the special session was called for a very, very critically important issue, drawing new maps for the congressional delegation. And the legislators did not need any other distraction. They needed to give that topic full focus in these short 5 days that they have. And that's the reason. We'll address the fentanyl bill in the next regular session.
Okay. Let's talk about the issue of school choice. There were some school choice related bills that passed this last session. You had the bill improving the charter school law. You had the bill kind of expanding the Accountability Act. That was very important. But some are pushing for a larger expansion of school choice, specifically in the voucher area. You had that Price Act. You've got some others in the past. Is that something, is that voucher realm, is that something that you want to pursue as far as school choice goes in the future?
Todd, my goal is for Alabama to be the most school choice friendly state in the nation. I want us to have lots of school choices for our parents to choose from. And we're going to be working now already on a bill, an ESA bill, Educational Savings Account bill, to present to the legislature for the next session. And I'm very optimistic that that will pass. But it's important for our children to have, parents to have choices to send their children to school, whether it's public, private, homeschooling, whatever. But the goal is to get our children a quality education.
Wow, that's some news. Working on an ESA bill for next session. Okay, well, we will certainly be following that and following up. Also on the issue of education, this last week, we had some mixed results coming out of the state's ACAP scores. It's, these are the scores that all of our students take just to measure effectiveness and measure proficiency. You had a lot of improvements in math, some improvements in reading. There were mixed results there. What caught everybody's attention, though, was the number of third graders that, if the Literacy Act retention provision would have been in place this past year, how many would have been at least capable of being held back, capable of being retained. Last time we talked, you told me you'd veto any further delay of the Literacy Act's retention provision. Is that still the case?
Very definitely. We do no service to a child to just pass them on without them reading proficiently. We've got to have children reading proficiently when they leave the third grade.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are you thinking about reading? I mean, we've seen some progress in NAEP scores. We're doing NAEP again, this year, this coming year. Have you been pleased so far with what the Literacy Act has produced, and are you optimistic about actually what's going to happen with our readers, given we had some struggles there for a while?
When we're continuing to promote reading and math excellence and achievement, and in reading we have summer camps now summer reading camps. Excuse me. We've got the Dolly Parton Library available to all parents of newborns up to their 5 years of age. We continue to push reading in this summer reading program. I've already received hundreds of letters from my school children telling me about their books that they are reading and how much fun they're having with what books. So it's important, but what really is important is for our parents to start reading to their children when the children are just babies.
Yeah.
Our parents are our first teachers.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of these letters that you got. I guess it was posted on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. That's got to be pretty gratifying as a former teacher yourself and now the governor to see some of these policies, actually, the students actually sending you letters and showing you what they're learning.
Well, it's impressive to me, and I'm thrilled to death that they care enough about reading, first of all, and secondly, to let me know about it. That means a lot.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to the issue of prisons. This is not exactly a fun topic because we struggle. We're struggling in this area. There have been a lot of concerns here recently expressed in this building, in the legislature, about cost overruns. Cost overruns on these new facilities that are being built, specifically in Elmore and I guess eventually in Escambia. Also with these legal contracts, cost overruns with those. Are we any closer to getting the situation with prisons to a resolution, something that we can live with?
Well, let me point out, Todd, that we've not built a new building of prison in 50 years. If this was easy to do, it would have been done by governors way ahead of me. But I'm not afraid of the hard task, and this is one of those hard tasks. But we've got to have effective prisons. They've got to be built. We're going to build them, and the legislature's been very supportive and understanding of our dilemma right now, but we're trying to be cost effective as well as make the changes in the architectural drawings that would satisfy the courts for their vocational training and other requirements that the court order has. So we're working on it, and I'm optimistic, but prisons are vital to our criminal justice system, to public safety, and this is just a project that has to be completed.
Are you concerned about those overruns, though? Because I guess what's been expressed to me is, these contractors are kind of in the catbird seat. They can basically charge whatever they want because we're sort of backed into a corner. Is there any recourse the state has to, enforce some cost-saving measures and get those costs down?
I assure you, we are taking every opportunity with John Hamm and others looking at that issue to keep costs down but be effective. Mm-hmm. We're working on that.
How's he doing? I know he's been on the job about a year now. Are you satisfied with his leadership of the department?
John Hamm?
Yes.
He's doing a good job, and we have an execution tonight, and so that'll be another big event in his administration, and I hope everything goes well. They've certainly been rehearsing and reviewing their protocols.
Well, Governor, I can't let you go without asking you about this new beer. This Kay Ivey sweet tea sour ale with tea, with your unmistakable likeness there on the can. This is just really interesting. Did you ever think you'd have a beer with your likeness and an image?
Of course not, and I think they're having a lot of fun with it, but I just wanted you to have a memento of this fun. I appreciate people trying to be fun, and the beer does taste pretty good.
Okay, well, maybe we'll give it a try. I just think that, never a dull moment in Alabama politics. Well, thanks again, Governor, for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall. Mr. Attorney General, thanks for coming on the show.
Always good to be with you.
We're dealing this week with this sticky issue of redistricting. It's been a long week, frankly, dealing with it. And the only reason we're here is because the Supreme Court ruled, essentially agreed with that 11th Circuit panel that the maps passed in 2021, the current maps, likely violated the Voting Rights Act. I'll get to what the future might look like in a minute, but looking back at that case, I wondered what your thoughts were. Were you disappointed? Were you surprised? What were your thoughts about the court's legal ruling?
Yeah, I think both. First of all, we were very disappointed in the ruling because we believe the legislature acted consistent with the guidance that had previously been received from the court about how to be able to draw Alabama's districts. There wasn't much change in those lines, and if you recall, was approved by a federal court in a very similar way many years ago. So it's not as if the legislature deviated with a new structure or a new plan. In fact, it was very consistent with what we had seen historically, at least for the last 30 years in our state. And then clearly surprised by the ruling, but so were legal commentators across the country, right? I mean, they fully believed that when we were able to get the stay granted, that the court indicated very clearly there that they wanted to be able to come in and provide additional clarity around the current case law surrounding Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And in fact, you saw even the Chief Justice in the denial of stay, in his dissent from the granting of the stay, in that portion, acknowledged that the court needed to be able to weigh in and provide greater clarity. And so when we saw, number one, the chief write it and then write it in favor of the plaintiffs, I do think that we were surprised. But not only that, but they didn't provide additional clarity. And in fact, we heard from counsel for the legislature even this week in front of one of the committees say that the court didn't give us much guidance moving forward, acknowledged that the legislature needed to be able to draw a new map, and obviously that's what they're in the process of doing right now. But at the same time, didn't really give additional clarity around those factors that the three-judge panel is going to consider. But I do believe the legislature is acting diligently. They're weighing multiple factors because it's more than just simply this dynamic of race, which seems to dominate the conversation. But there are multiple traditional redistricting principles that have to be considered, including the compactness of a district, the communities of interest, which we believe is a significantly important factor, as they're going about drawing these lines. And I want to commend the chairman for being very thoughtful about what they're doing, and I think that they're engaging in this in the right way.
Mm-hmm. I did find those comments from Anthony Lee very interesting. So we've all now seen the prevailing map that will soon be going back to court for the same three-judge panel to review it August 14th. You didn't draw this map, so it's not a product of the Attorney General, but lawmakers did seem to follow your legal cues that you laid out in that letter to the committee last week. I was hoping you could sort of spell out what your case was in that letter for our viewers.
Well, and it's not a letter that we initiated. It was, in fact, in response to the plaintiffs themselves sending a letter to the redistricting committee that was frankly contrary or inconsistent with some of the submissions that they either made in public statements or, in fact, in writing. And that really centered around this idea of is the legislature's requirement moving forward with this new map to draw two majority-minority districts. And what we saw in the submissions of plaintiffs to the court is that they acknowledged that certain plans that were considered during the earlier litigation that did not have two majority-minority districts were appropriate and would be compliant with Section 2. We saw the plaintiff himself, Mr. Milligan, being asked about this particular question and acknowledged there that a singleton plan previously submitted as another group of plaintiffs that did not have that 50+% threshold was sufficient. And so in their letter to this committee where they took a very different position, we felt it was incumbent to be able to highlight that and not just make statements, but to cite briefs and to cite specific comments that were made by those that were involved in the case. And although they responded back to be able to say that, oh no, those were nuanced legal arguments, their comments were direct and specific and including to the United States Supreme Court, and we felt like it was important for the committee to know that.
Well, I guess we'll all see on August 14th what the court thinks. Let's go back to the regular session. You were involved in legislation this past legislative session, particularly on the issue of crime. It got called the Criminal Enterprise Bill, kind of renamed, more colloquially the Gang Bill. You helped get this across the finish line. You celebrated that. And we all hear about gang crime, especially in cities. So I'm wondering how this law will help law enforcement actually attack that problem of gang crime.
But it gives them a tool that they didn't have before. And in fact, before this law was passed, that'll go into effect in September, a majority of the states had. And that is when you have organized criminal activity. And again, this is not just groups of people that hang out together and are a part of kind of a social club. These are individuals that come together for purposes of perpetuating crime throughout our communities. And when I spoke to mayors and law enforcement around the state, when we look at and see, for example, in Birmingham, the escalating numbers of homicides that we see, they give me that direct tie to these organized groups in their communities. And let's not say that it's about the Bloods or the Crips or MS-13. It's just simply local community groups coming together, many times rivals with one another, that are committing these offenses. And so the bill itself does really two things. Number one, it elevates gang members committing crimes that further the gang's purposes. We elevate the punishment level there. And if you do it with guns, and whether it be possessing the gun, brandishing the gun, or using the guns, then we're going to be able to use certain mandatory minimums to be able to keep you behind bars. And we're excited about the possibility that this bill is going to now provide for law enforcement to make their streets safer. But I can guarantee you it is something that law enforcement and elected officials have said is essential for allowing them to be able to make communities safer. And the fact that the legislature did, by almost unanimous vote, by the way, can we acknowledge that both Democrats and Republicans came together completely unanimously in the Senate, almost unanimously in the House, believing that this was a valuable tool, then we need to get behind that effort of law enforcement using it effectively in their communities.
Does the word get out? Because I'm thinking ultimately to stop the crime, the criminals themselves have to decide not to. Those enhanced penalties, enhanced punishment, does word get out in the community that, hey, this is a big risk and I'm going to decide not to make this choice?
Yeah, I can tell you 27 years now, I think, for me in prosecution. One thing that I do know is that the criminal network has a pretty good network of information sharing. And the first time we get one of these cases prosecuted, when we're able to use these mandatory minimums, when we're able to elevate that punishment, it's going to send a very clear message, not only of accountability, but also let's hope that it causes people not to want to commit these crimes in the first place. But yeah, I'm very confident that that message is going to be loud and clear.
Let's switch gears and talk about prisons. I was actually talking to Governor Ivey earlier about the new facilities and the kind of the cost overruns there that are really frustrating to lawmakers. But there's also concern here in this building about these mounting legal costs. It kind of came into relief, I guess last week at the contract review meeting. It kind of illuminated just how much the state is spending on, contracting lawyers for these various cases, these various lawsuits. Is there an end in sight to these lawsuits and the costs associated with them?
Well, I think there's definitely an end in sight, and the opportunity to be able to resolve this is something that the state always should consider. But there's more than just simply the systemic cases. Our office does over 80% of the litigation on behalf of the Department of Corrections, individual cases that are filed against the department. It's the systemic case, though, that probably gathers the most attention. And let's acknowledge that in that case, we have the Department of Justice, we have well-funded groups from outside the state that are initiating this, and Alabama needs the capacity to respond. And so not only is my office involved, but in this situation, outside counsel who has very specific expertise in national cases. Because let's leave no doubt behind, what the Department of Justice wants to do is to be able to take over the Alabama Department of Corrections. That's not the remedy that we believe is appropriate. And as we continue to evaluate this case as we move forward, there's really two things that we're looking at. Number one is kind of the scope of relief that the plaintiffs would ultimately want. For example, are they talking certain activities within all of the male facilities, because that's really what the litigation is about right now? Or are they targeted and limited based on the particular facility itself? And then what's the ultimate remedy they want as far as resolution? Is it, number one, something that makes sense? Is it something consistent with what we think the best practices are around the country? But I can tell you this, and I've been very firm from the very beginning, and this was long before the litigation was filed, is that I'm not going to allow Alabama willing to enter into a consent decree. I see that there's precedent for that, and one of the best things I think Jeff Sessions did during his time as Attorney General was a memo to the Department of Justice condemning consent decrees as a whole. They're not a good vehicle for settlement. The only people that really are valued through that are the consultants and the third parties that get rich from those consent decrees, and we don't see the true value go to the institution it's trying to reform. But there are ways to resolve cases absent a consent decree. We remain open to that, but we're going to defend Alabama's interests with regard to this litigation moving forward.
Mm-hmm. It was at that contract review committee where a lawyer for the Department of Corrections told lawmakers that your office had prohibited them from entering into or negotiating a settlement with the federal government, but your chief counsel wrote a memo to the legislature this week saying that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the lawyer may have been referencing. We've never stopped any settlement. And again, I've been clear about a consent decree, and yet in discussing that legal strategy with our client, we've always been on the same accord. Again, we're going to make sure we defend Alabama's interests clearly. If there's a settlement that makes sense for the state of Alabama, then we'll make sure that we pursue that, just as we do in litigation for all their agencies.
Mm-hmm. One of the many lawsuits on your plate right now is defending the state law banning transgender treatments on minors. Alabama's law is enjoined here in the 11th Circuit, but interestingly, the 6th Circuit has allowed Tennessee's similar law to take effect while that case gets litigated. Are we headed to a circuit split here that is going to eventually go? Is this question going to go to the Supreme Court?
I can clearly see it go to the Supreme Court. In fact, right now we have our request to remove the stay granted by Judge Burke still pending before the 11th Circuit. You know, we're really pleased with Judge Sutton's order out of the 6th Circuit. The first time that we think we've seen a very thorough analysis based upon the facts that an appellate court has had an opportunity to consider not only the constitutional arguments made by plaintiffs, but also to be able to truly look at what we've alleged all along, which is the experimental nature of this treatment and why states have a right to be able to weigh in on behalf of kids. No doubt that with 20 now states having laws similar to this, these cases are going to continue to make their way up through the appellate courts. But one thing that I'm very proud of is positioning Alabama as a leader on this issue. In that 6th Circuit decision, we led the brief being able to support Tennessee. We've done it also recently with a victory just a week ago for the state of Kentucky. And we've worked with our surrounding states to be able to equip them with the knowledge and the legal analysis that the 6th Circuit found persuasive to be able to use to defend their cases as well.
Well, it has been a litigious summer. Lots of cases before the Supreme Court. I mean, monumental cases that have come this summer. Would this, I know it's tough to put a timeline on it, would this be something that would come up next year perhaps in oral arguments, or how long does it really take to get to before the Supreme Court?
Yeah, the question is how fleshed out the factual basis is for the court to ultimately consider. I mean, conceivably that 6th Circuit decision could be appealed any day now. We've not heard what the plaintiffs may want to do. And very similar, for example, to the redistricting case, which was granted on the basis of a preliminary injunction, the court could eventually consider it. But what I would believe is the court's probably going to look to a full vetting of the facts for factual findings from the district court, but then also to be able to weigh in very specifically about the equal protection claims that plaintiffs are making, along with kind of this question of what is a parent's right here and how far can they go in allowing children to seek this treatment contrary to what state law has provided.
Well, we will be watching that case. Mr. Attorney General, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next is State Senator Rodger Smitherman from Birmingham. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well,
thank you for having me.
It's been a long week.
It has.
Here in special session, y'all are finished. You just walked off the floor. We have a new map. We have a new congressional map that the legislature has passed. I'm presuming that the governor will sign it. It came down to party line votes, party line arguments all week. And let me just ask you, you've obviously been opposed to what passed all week. Can you kind of walk us through your main objections to what ultimately passed?
I sure can. The first thing, the process started off wrong in terms of the committee. The committee obviously had been doing some work on a bill that the committee was going to present. That work that the committee provided, no one from the minority side got knowledge of when they were going to work, information as to what times we were going to work, what the opportunity to bring input and suggestions, and the actual map that was supposed to come out of the committee. Ultimately, the committee presented a map to us in first impression, and from there I said that this is what we think we ought to work with. First of all, we had requested involvement, which it should have been automatically because the committee, and many of us, several of us are members of the committee. I'm a member of the committee, and yet it was done in an isolated manner to exclude us from being able to work directly with the committee to put input. And you may say, well, what do you mean? The formulation of the map that comes out of the committee should have been put together by the committee as a whole, but it was not.
Well, what about these voting populations? We keep hearing BVAP, Black Voting Age Population, and obviously the Supreme Court and the federal court panel talked about 2 districts with majority black or close to it.
That's correct.
Which is non-specific, so I guess that's the question. What is close to it? Are you of the opinion that this new district with just about 40% in the 2nd district, is that not close to it enough?
Well, let me say this. If you only took the isolated question about the numbers and the numbers being close to it, that's one subject. But the overall subject matter, and it relates to the numbers naturally, but it's that if it's an opportunity district, if it's not a majority African American district, then is it a district that an African American, a Democrat, or a minority that may not be African American will have an opportunity to win in that district? That's one of the major problems with that district that has been developed, that there was not a functionality report given. Even we didn't get any numbers on it till the last 3 hours before it was being considered for the conference committee and, of course, to be voted. So
is that the thing where you take the district as proposed and go back in history and look at sort of the voting patterns?
That's correct. You look at the voting patterns, you look at the makeup of the district, and if the district in particular is not a majority African American district, then you look on that in particular that you can't necessarily look at black or white because you can't dissect that out, and you can't take that solely under consideration.
Right.
But you can look at whether they voted Democrat or Republican, and because most of the candidates of choice by minorities are going to run you as a Democrat in this state. At least presently it is, and so you look at their willingness to cross over. That's what you call it, really. Or you're talking about independent thinking people, and the performance of that district is so dismal that it's not. It's only they call it an opportunity district, and I tell them, yeah, it's an opportunity to fail, to lose. That's what it is.
I heard y'all say that on the floor.
Yeah, it's not an opportunity to win; it's an opportunity to lose because the voting pattern in that district clearly shows that the maximum, the best candidate that we probably have put out as a Democratic Party, President Obama, and he only received 45% of the vote.
That's in that new 2nd district?
Yes. See, what we do, once they put the district together, we take the numbers that then comprise that new district, and then you do a functionality report on it to see how this district, over the last 10 years put together like this, if it had been together, how would it perform? And the performance in this new district clearly shows that it's not a ghost of chance that a minority is going to have a chance to win. So what's ended up happening, in essence, is that this district is designed as a safe district for the incumbent person in Congress right now. And I predict that if this district is enacted, that person will win.
It's so interesting, and even specifically on the second district, because if you go back 15, 20 years, there was plenty of, white voters voting for Democrats. I mean, 2008 is a great example because that was the year Bobby Bright won the second district. I remember that race very well. But the voting patterns have become so racially polarized since.
That's right.
I guess, and that's sort of what the Supreme Court pointed out. I mean, years ago, if you had a 40% black district, that's probably going to go Democrat, but not now.
Yeah. In fact, we only have one area in this state that has continually to vote in that manner, and that's what we had proposed in the map that I presented, and the map that Senator Singleton presented, was a District 6, Congressional District 6, which, because you have to take the whole county principles into effect, was made up primarily of Jefferson County, about 43,000 people in Shelby County. And that district, even though it was only about a 44 maybe % African American district, that district had a pattern over the last, really since 2008, as you said, since 2008 actually, of being supportive of Democratic candidates and minority candidates, even though you have a very broad spectrum of people who live in that particular county, but they were willing enough to be independent in their votes, to vote for candidates other than just a candidate who was a Republican, if they thought that candidate was the best candidate, and to be able to be elected. And that's what an opportunity district is, a realistic opportunity based on that if you do that, you have an opportunity to elect an African American or a Democrat or a minority. And the reason I said Democrat, because it might be a white Democrat, for that matter. But that district will provide an opportunity for someone in those categories to be elected.
I understand. When I talk to Republicans, they keep talking about compactness. They keep talking about communities of interest, and that this map really accomplishes those two goals: compactness, dealing with the packing issue that was obviously maybe the root of the overturning of the old map, but also communities of interest, keeping communities of interest together. They keep pointing to those things, and it's not an accident. It's not a coincidence, because those are the things that Justice Kavanaugh pointed out in his opinion, right? In addition to the racial makeup of the districts, compactness. And do they have a point? Do they have an argument for maybe even targeting Kavanaugh to say, okay, if we can satisfy those two things with him, maybe we can flip him? I keep hearing about that.
Well, let me say this. The orders that the Supreme Court sent down was very clear and explicit what they were looking for us to do. The compactness was only one portion of what they sent down. They talked about the compactness. As you said, they talk about communities of interest. They talk about a opportunity for, they said explicitly in there about the opportunity for minorities to elect a person of their choice. They talked about a district not being designed, and they use these words, not being designed so that a block of voters, and I think they actually said white voters, would not exist, to where that it wouldn't be an opportunity for a minority to have a chance to win. And what only way you can tell that, or one of the best ways to tell that, is what I said about that functionality study, to be able to look at the patterns. And of course, we ran some numbers ourselves, and that's how we came up with the 45%. And even in Doug Jones' race, when he ran against Senator Tipperville, he must have no more than 45% of the votes. And of course, he was a white Democrat. So you see why I just said Democrats as well. Yes, there's no opportunity there, period, in that district for anybody to to come in other than someone on the Republican side, or in particular the incumbent, to be elected. So the district doesn't satisfy those things, as well as still questionable about the community of interest. You split up the black belt, You got part of them over here in 2. You got part of them over in 7. Then you come up in Jefferson County. You stick 7 up there, and then you pull out part of the people who have a community interest that may have it with the black belt. Then you leave the other ones there, and they got to go to 6, which is not an opportunity district in the new map. So now they're over there in a position that they don't have opportunity to do anything, whereas the county itself should have been kept whole, and that actually should have been a separate congressional district with the number of people in that county.
Well, let's say you're right, and that this map that just passed is unacceptable to not just the 3-judge panel, but the Supreme Court. Because I'm guessing we're going back to the Supreme Court.
Sure.
Whether or not they take the case is up for debate. What happens then? I remember you talking about a special master. What does that process look like? What is a special master? Is that like a judge? What would, if the court denies this map, what happens next?
As you mentioned, they will appoint a special master, and that special master would then be the person who is in charge of drawing the districts. We won't have any input. The legislature will have 0 input. It'll look at the mission of the orders of the court, and based on his interpretation of those orders or clarity, if he communicates back with the court, then he'll draw districts that he think will satisfy the courts. And if the court accepts what he draws, then that'll be the court's position.
Is the special master generally like a federal judge or a magistrate, or what types of people, or just an attorney that specializes in this?
I'm not sure who the courts use as their special master. My just guesstimation would be that it would be an attorney and or a retired judge that have been involved in this process for years, and who they consider to be neutral, and that person will be charged with that.
Well, it would need to happen quick because these elections are coming up, right? Qualifying is later this year.
And I look for even when this map is approved, if it's this map or if it's one that fits the criteria which I just mentioned, I still think that when we get to 2024, it's probably going to be challenged after that election.
Wow.
I just think that's the way it's going to go. This process is going to be moving for a long time.
Oh boy, redistricting is always a sticky issue. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about this other issue that came up this special session, dealing with the budget isolation resolution. This is a pretty, in the weeds issue, but dealing with it's sort of a procedural move, one that kind of slows you down when you have to take it in every little vote before the budget's passed. Can you walk through what the change did and what it accomplished?
Well, as you mentioned, all our bills that come before us before the budget is passed and signed requires the budget isolation resolution. That requires that 21 legislators have to vote yes, so that we then can take up the bill and be able to consider it, whether it passes or not. That's sort of a check and balance that they focus on the fact that the number one thing is the budget.
Right. So before those budgets pass, you got to set them aside.
If you think that these items are important enough, then to make that statement by voting and getting 21 votes. The problem is that in the House, the Senate took the position that we have to have 2/3 of the people who are on the roll, that's 2/3 of 35, which is 21. The House took the position that they had to have, I think it's like 30-something people to say yes, and then that would constitute the necessary to meet the BIR. In other words, they took a percentage of people who voted versus the percentage of the enrollment in the House, which is 105. So as a result of that, they took the position that they were doing it right, and of course the Senate took the position that they were doing it right. And so in order to cut off any kind of problems with an interpretation, if those were challenged, then we had to come up with a process that was pretty uniformative based on that. And so the process that we came up with is that on local bills, we would just eliminate the need to having to be our period, except on constitutional amendments that there was a desire to have the 21 votes before the Constitution Amendment, but the conversation, I think, finally came to fruition that to have a constitutional amendment, you got to have 21 votes anyway.
Right.
So why would you have to be IR? Because it's not going to pass unless 21 people
Yeah.
vote for it. So that was the changes that we made today.
Well, I'm shocked to hear there's ever disagreement between the Senate and the House about the procedure. Senator, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on the show, and safe travels home.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you.
All right.
And good to be here.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time with more Capital Journal right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.